What if the money in your bank account is being quietly redesigned to give central banks unprecedented control over how you spend, save, and live your financial life? This is not a distant possibility being discussed in academic journals. This is happening right now as central banks around the world race to develop digital currencies that would fundamentally transform the relationship between citizens and the monetary system. And the implications for your purchasing power and financial freedom are far more serious than most people realize. The Federal Reserve has been actively researching and developing a digital dollar for years, while officials publicly maintain they are simply exploring options. Sources familiar with the project suggest the technical infrastructure is far more advanced than public statements indicate. The Boston Fed, in partnership with the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, has already completed multiple phases of testing on a digital currency platform capable of processing hundreds of thousands of transactions per second. This is not theoretical research. This is operational development. The European Central Bank is even further along with its digital euro project. Officials have confirmed they are moving toward a decision on implementation, with pilot programs already underway in several member states. China has already deployed its digital yuan across major cities, with hundreds of millions of citizens now using a currency that gives the government complete visibility into every transaction. The race is on, and the Federal Reserve cannot afford to be left behind. But the question nobody in power wants to answer honestly is what this means for ordinary people. A central bank digital currency is fundamentally different from the cash and bank deposits you use today. When you hold physical cash, you have an asset that exists outside the banking system. No one can see what you spend it on. No one can prevent you from using it. No one can make it expire or program conditions into how it functions. A central bank digital currency eliminates all of these protections. Reports indicate that CBDC designs being considered by major central banks include programmable features that would allow the issuing authority to set conditions on how money can be used. This could include expiration dates that force you to spend within a certain time frame. It could include geographic restrictions limiting where the currency functions. It could include category restrictions preventing purchases of certain goods or services. And it could include negative interest rates that automatically reduce your balance if you save rather than spend. These are not conspiracy theories. These are features that central bankers have openly discussed in policy papers and conference presentations. The Bank for International Settlements has published research explicitly advocating for programmable money as a tool of monetary policy. They frame it as providing central banks with new instruments to manage the economy. But the instrument they are describing is unprecedented control over individual financial behavior. Now, consider this development in the context of inflation and purchasing power. The Federal Reserve has already demonstrated its willingness to expand the money supply dramatically since 2020. The Fed has created trillions of dollars through quantitative easing and emergency lending programs. This expansion has contributed to inflation that has eroded the purchasing power of every dollar you hold. Official inflation numbers tell part of the story, but anyone buying groceries, paying rent, or filling a gas tank knows the real impact has been far greater. Reports suggest that the true loss of purchasing power for average Americans over the past 4 years exceeds what official statistics capture. A central bank digital currency would give the Fed even more powerful tools to implement policies that transfer wealth from savers to debtors, and from ordinary citizens to financial institutions. The political dimension of this transformation cannot be ignored. Donald Trump has repeatedly criticized the Federal Reserve and suggested that a future administration would seek to exert more influence over monetary policy. He has also expressed skepticism about central bank digital currencies, framing them as tools of government surveillance and control. Whether you support or oppose Trump, his position has made CBDC development a politically charged issue that was previously confined to technical circles. Sources suggest that Fed officials are acutely aware that CBDC implementation could become a major political battleground and are strategizing about how to advance the project while minimizing public backlash. The institutional architecture being constructed would survive any change in administration. Once a digital currency infrastructure is built, the tools of control exist, regardless of who occupies the White House or who chairs the Federal Reserve. This is why the current moment is so critical. Decisions being made right now in technical committees and policy meetings will determine the financial system your children and grandchildren inherit. The Treasury Department has been coordinating with the Fed on CBDC development as part of broader efforts to modernize payment systems. These initiatives are typically framed in terms of efficiency, financial inclusion, and competing with China. What is rarely mentioned is that every improvement in efficiency for the central bank represents a reduction in privacy and autonomy for the citizen. The current banking system, despite its many flaws, contains friction that protects individuals. That friction is what central banks are working to eliminate. International coordination on CBDC standards is accelerating. The Bank for International Settlements is working to ensure that different national digital currencies can interact, creating a global financial surveillance network that would make sanctions enforcement instant and escape virtually impossible. This has obvious applications for foreign policy and geopolitical control. But the same infrastructure that can freeze the assets of a sanctioned nation can freeze the assets of a domestic citizen or business. The legal frameworks governing how these tools might be used domestically remain dangerously underdeveloped. Congress has held hearings on CBDC, but no comprehensive legislation has been passed to limit how the Federal Reserve could implement or use a digital dollar. This regulatory vacuum means the Fed has wide latitude to design a system that serves institutional interests rather than public ones. Sources familiar with congressional discussions suggest that many legislators do not fully understand the technical details of what is being proposed. They are being asked to approve a transformation of money itself without grasping its implications. The situation is unprecedented. For the first time in history, central banks are acquiring the ability to monitor and control financial transactions at the individual level in real time. The purchasing power you lose to inflation is visible. The freedom you would lose to programmable money is invisible until it is too late. The question is not whether central banks are developing these capabilities. The evidence confirms they are. The question is whether citizens will understand what is at stake before the infrastructure of control is too embedded to remove, and whether the political will exists to demand a monetary system that serves people rather than institutions.